Working with radio avails or rate card. The purpose of this lesson is to study and understand radio and the concept of working with radio avails or rate cards. Part of this lesson is the topic of the agency commission model, which is gross rates versus net rates. After you finish this video lesson, you will be able to define the concept of the agency media commission model, recognize the difference between gross rates and net rates, calculate a rate from net to gross and gross to net, recognize a radio rate card or avails and how to read the terms and conditions, apply the radio rate card or avails to develop a radio schedule, and know how to report the results when you're developing a radio schedule. So now let's start with the basic terminology you need to understand this lesson. The agency media commission is a system of compensating the advertising agency for the work of negotiating, placing, and stewardship or monitoring a schedule at a standard industry standard of 15%. Rates are extended by the media to advertising agencies and may or may not include the industry standard 15% commission. 15% added is a gross rate, and without the 15% is a net rate. Avails, which is short for availabilities, is a report extended to the advertiser and the advertising agency that is basically a list of the costs or rates that they're charging for the placement of commercial units in various lengths, measured in seconds and in various day parts. In radio, the most common commercial unit length are 60 seconds and 30 seconds. There may be others. Unit rates can also be extended in a rate card format and can include other opportunities and sponsorships. Radio dayparts are the way that radio stations outline their programming hours and offer to advertisers. Remember that radio stations management dictate the hours for their dayparts, but it's very typical that morning drive starts at 5 or 6 to 10 a.m., midday approximately 10 to 3 p.m., 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., afternoon drive, which is 3 to 7 p.m., evening 7 p.m. to midnight, etc., etc. This is their inventory to sell and how they make their money. Programming and talent generally drive audiences, and in radio, this is measured also in ratings and impressions. ROS. This is one of the rate cards day parts. And by the way, this applies to different media. But it stands for run of station. What this means is that the station will place the advertiser's commercial unit wherever they have availabilities and usually within specified parameters. For example, a rate card may have several ROS options, but let's say it's Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to midnight, which means that the station will place the advertiser's commercial anywhere within those days, Monday through Friday, and within those hours. These availabilities are less expensive than tighter day part, like say midday, which is Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 3 p. As a rule of thumb, the wider the placement options for the stations, the less expensive the rate, and vice versa. The tighter or less options of placement, the rate will be more expensive. These parameters have to be agreed upon between the station and the buyer. While this day part is not part of this specific example that we're going to talk about, I want to explain the concept because it will appear in the day part you will see in the rate card included in the PowerPoint. Gross rates are the media rates with the standard 15% agency commission already added. Net rates are media rates without that standard 15% agency commission. Let me give you a little more background about how this works. Advertising agencies started to develop in the late 1800s. And around 1920, the concept of agency commissions for their work in placing media was starting to be recognized by the media industry and finally settled at 15%. This represented an agreement between the media and advertising agencies for the creative and other services the agencies provided to advertisers. The commission of 15% was recognized only to ad agencies. If advertisers bought space or later airtime directly from the media, they were charged at a gross or undiscounted rates. This was the principle. Today, few agency compensation arrangements are exactly alike, but other alternatives to the traditional 15% media commission system have evolved. The 15% remained in place for almost 100 years, imagine that, when it slowly started getting replaced and watered down by fees and fixed rates. There's still media deals that are made at the 15% agency commission rate. In fact, according to a recent Association of National Advertisers study on agency compensation, there is a bit of resurgence of 15% deals in the programmatic space. This is a new word, which is a method of buying advertising, especially digital, and that you will learn in another lesson. Advertisers who need bulk reach forego the typical negotiation about people times hours times markups times bonus, and instead they just align with a straight 15% commission. Believe me, I have worked on the agency side and I've had to develop working proposals for clients that allow the agency to be properly compensated for its services and media tasks. The 15% may also serve as a benchmark for agency income. Agencies aim to get as close to or go over the 15% equivalent of income from clients. Before we get into the agency compensation variations, let's examine how agency commission of 15% works as it relates to rates. Let's say that a client approves a media budget of, and I'm going to write it down just so that there's a visual. A client approves a budget of $1,000 gross. This is a budget. The keyword here is gross. The advertising agency is given the $1,000 gross budget to negotiate for media placement. The media submits gross rates, meaning the unit rates for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever, to the ad agency, and the negotiation starts for this $1,000 gross budget for media placement. Once a negotiation is done, the advertising agency places a media schedule using these gross rates, which becomes a contract between the station and the ad agency representing a client or an advertiser. When the schedule runs, the advertising agency pays the media. So this is the budget. The media is going to get paid $750 for the commercial airtime or space and keeps the agency commission at 15%. They keep $150 or 15% of this $1,000 budget, which is gross, for their services. Again, the client agency compensations models have evolved, but the gross rates assumes a 15% markup, and the net rate is the naked rate without the 15% agency commission. This 15% is also what is called an industry standard. Other media compensation models for a client to pay their advertising agencies for services may include flat rate commission at less than 15%. Another type of compensation is what is called a downward sliding scale commission system. In this scale is when an advertiser might, for example, or advertiser or client, pay the ad agency 14%, let's say, for the first 10 million in media billings, sliding down to 12.5% on the next 10 million of media billings, and 10% on all billings in excess of 20 million, etc. So there's a slide. There are other models, but that's another discussion of client agency compensation. By the way, the greatest advantage of commission systems of agency compensation is that they are simple to administer. The greatest weakness of commission systems is that the basis of agency compensation, media space time, has no relation to either the quantity or the quality of the creative work and other services that are provided to the client or advertiser by its ad agency. But again, that's a separate discussion. In this lesson, we will discuss the gross and net rates as recognized by media on a 15% agency commission model. Let me clarify that regardless of how the client agrees to compensate their agency and what term of compensation the agency accepts to be compensated at, a gross rate means 15% markup. A net rate is without this 15% markup. Again, this 15% markup, industry standard recognition by the media, bears no weight on how the client compensates the agency. If the rate is gross, the agency will pay the rate less 15%. Whether they get to keep that 15% or less is between the client and the ad agency or media placement agencies. In the rate card or avails, certain information lets the media buyer know what the rates really mean. For examples, the stipulation or the fine print of the rate card will tell you if the rates are gross or net, and if the rates reflected are 30-second units, 60-second units, etc. The example that we will use in this media math problem will present a 60-second unit length and will also tell you how to calculate another unit length using the 60-second rate as the base. You calculate a 30 or a 10-second commercial unit from what the rate card tells you. You have to read the fine print. And as a media professional, this is your job. So let's start by understanding the numbers and the rate card. For this media math problem, and let me rate this really quick so that we get a fresh board. That's better. So now, understanding the numbers and the rate card for this media problem, we will use a very simple rate card. And again, refer to the video lesson PowerPoint on working with radio avails and rate cards and study the chart. Always remember that this is an example and an illustration, but media management for each station reserves the right to set pricing and outline the hours of their day parts and other factors because it's the way they run their business. In radio, generally, the money makers are morning and afternoon drive time, just like in TV is prime time. That's where the biggest audiences can be found. And think about it. Mornings and afternoons are when people are typically in their cars driving to work or from work. Understanding people's media habits sometimes lies in observation and common sense. The numbers will also tell you the story. Not all the time, but you have to become a student of people's behavior. That's a side note. In looking at this rate card, you see several rates, for example, for different day parts. And they're also telling you that the rates reflected, and let me just write it down because this is important, the rates reflected are net. And they are 60-second units. and that if you're placing a 30-second commercial unit for 30s, right? Or 10-second units, you have to apply the percentage stipulated in the rate card to calculate the correct rate. We're going to do this in the media math. But again, you have to read everything. For example, beware if the budget given is gross, but the rates are net. Also notice that the rates shown are 60 seconds. But if you want to place 30-second commercials, you have to apply 75% of a 60-second rate. Or you multiply it times 0.75 to get the 30-second rate. Same concept if your commercial unit length is a 10-second. According to this rate card, again, this is an example, you have to apply 40% to get the 60-second rate shown to a 10-second rate. The point I'm trying to make is that you have to read and understand everything the rate card or Avail is telling you. Also, if you don't understand, be safe and clarify the terms of the deal. Let me use this step to help you understand the concept of gross versus net calculation. This is a good, segue. Remember that regardless of whether the agency gets to keep this 15%, agency commission, this is understood to be the agency commission, but it's also the difference between gross and net rates. So again, going from gross to net, you multiply times 0.15 and whatever you get, or 15 divided by 100, and you subtract that from the gross rate to produce the net rate. And going from net to gross, there's a magic number. So this is from gross to net. And this one is from net to gross. So the number is 1.1765. So from gross to net, let's say let's just work on an example. Let me put this a little bit clearer. So this is gross to net, and this is net to gross. And we're going to give you a very simple example. So let's take gross to net first, okay? So let's say that you have a $100 gross rate, and you want to net it down, right? So you take the 100 gross rate, multiply it times 0.15, right? You get $15. And that equals $85 net. And the reason I'm doing it this way, because you can multiply also times 0.85, is that you understand that the agency commission here is $15. So if you have a gross rate, multiply times 0.15, that's your, agency commission, subtract it, and that gives you an $85 net rate. So the calculation will depend on whether you're dealing with gross or net. Now, let's take it from the net to gross perspective. So let's say here that you have your $85 net, and you can do the calculation at home. So you have an $85 net, multiply it times this magical number of 1.1765, and you'll see that it will give you $100 gross. The math just works that way. So again, it depends on whether your budget is expressed or given as a gross or net, that you use gross or net individual rates. So compare apples to apples. Now, let's go to understanding the numbers and the budget allocation by day part. So let me erase here again. So in this problem, it's going to sound very long, but it has several steps because you're dealing first with, you know, a few moving parts. So now let's understand the numbers and budget allocation by day part. So we're going to find out how much money to spend in each day part. This will generally be given in the buying specifications or specs that are typically sent by the media planner to the media buyer, who will negotiate and execute the media buy. This example is as if you're the media buyer and you're putting together a radio media buy using a station rate card or Avails. So here, because we're going to be calculating budgets by day part, is budget multiplied by budget allocation percentage multiplied by budget allocation percentage, you know, divide, or, you know, that number divided by 100, and that will give you how much you have to allocate. We're going to get into that example. So the radio media schedule to be placed is as follows. And again, use the rate card shown. So you have a total budget of $5,000 gross. And we're going to take each day part separately, and the buying brief is going to tell you that, okay? So basically, in morning drive, it says that you have to allocate 30% of your $5,000 budget. So, and these are 30 seconds, but we will deal with the rates later. Right now, we're only dealing with budget allocation by day part. So you take your $5,000, and again, it tells you that in morning drive, the allocation is 30% of the budget. So multiply your 5,000 times 0.30, and that gives you an allocation of $1,500. Okay? So that's your budget allocation for morning drive. Now for midday, which is Monday through Friday, 10 a to 3 p, that is 25%. So 25% is the same thing. You take your budget of $5,000 times 0.25, and that equals $1,250. That's your allocation of budget to spend in the midday. And then you have afternoon drive as a day part. And the budget allocation here is 35%. So you do the same thing. 5,000 times 0.35, and that gives you $1,750. That's your budget allocation into afternoon drive. And then evening is your last day part. And here, you know, beware, this is 10% of your budget allocation, but they are 10-second commercial units. We'll deal with that later. So here, same thing. You take your 5,000 times 0.10, and that gives you $500. So that's your gross allocation of the budget for evening programming or day part. So hopefully this is clear. Now, let's go to calculating the rates. So again, keep in mind that, let me go back here for a minute. Let me erase erase this because we're gonna, again, you have to do things in parts. Keep in mind that the rate card that we're working with reflects 60-second commercial units net, but the budget is gross. Remember that we had a $5,000 gross budget. So for the net rates, we're going to apply a couple of calculations that we need to apply to each rate in the rate card in order to get the correct rate we can work with. So in order to calculate, again, a 30-second rate or a 10-second rate from a 60-second unit rate shown in the rate card, the percentage allocation is not standard. This is only used for this illustration. So you have to divide the percentage shown by 100 or move the decimal points over 2 spaces. So the formula here is 60-second net rate multiplied times the percentage shown divided by 100, or for a 30-second unit, in this case, is you apply 75% of a 60-second rate shown in the rate card, or 0.75, in order to get your 30-second unit rate. Or for a 10-second unit is 40%, or 0.40. So to calculate the rate from net to gross, you have to calculate, you have to multiply the net rate times 1.1765. Memorize this number because this adds the 15% agency standard commission, which is basically what means to have a gross rate. So we're going to do it one by one. So let's take first your morning drive. Okay? So we have a 60-second net rate, so this is your base rate, of $145. So let's put here that this is 60 net. Okay? So the first multiplication here is you have to take it from a 60 to a 30 by multiplying it times 0.75. So 145 times 0.75, which is the percentage. Again, this is not standard. This is for this illustration. So to get it from a 60 to a 30, the rate card tells you take 75% of the 60-second rate in order to get the 30-second rate. So now multiplying that, 145 times 75 equals $127.94. Let me make sure that we're in the right slide. Okay, 127. I'm sorry. Sorry. It's to take it from a 60 to a 30, multiply the 145 times 0.75, and you're going to get 108.75 for morning drive. Okay? Now, the second calculation you need to make is, now you have to get it, this is a 30-second net. Now you have to take it to a 30-second gross. Okay, so from a 60 net to a 30 net, and from a 30 net to a 30 gross, because you're dealing with a gross budget. So now here you take your $108.75 and you multiply it times 1.1765, and that equals $127.94. So that is your 30-second gross rate in morning drive. Now let's do the same with midday. So in midday, your base rate is $125. So $125 is your 60-second net rate. Now here, Again, to get it into from a 60 to a 30, you have to multiply times 0.75 to get it to a net 30. And that gives you $93.75. So that is gross net 60 to net 30, and now you have to gross it up. So now here, again, you multiply times 1.1765, and in that calculation, the gross 30-second rate is $110.30. So now let's do, let me see if I can use another color. Okay, so let's do afternoon drive. And again, in afternoon drive, your 60-second net rate is, according to this rate card, remember, this is not standard, is $135. So that's a 60-second net rate in afternoon drive. Now again, we have to multiply it times 0.75 because you take 75% of a 60 net in order to get a 30 net. So from net 60 to net 30, and multiply times 0.75, the answer is 101.25. Okay? Multiply times 1.1765, which will gross it up to a 30. The answer here is $119.12. Okay? And then for evening, oh, this is nice and bright. For evening, let's say that your 60-second net rate is $81. Now here is where it changes because we're dealing not only with 10 seconds, so 10 seconds you multiply according to the rate card times 0.40. Again, this is an example, it's not standard. So in order to get it from a 60-second net rate to a 30-second net rate, multiply times 0.40 because that's what the rate card tells you is $32.40. Multiply times 1.1765, which is taking it from a net 30 to a gross 30. The multiplication to this number, it gives you a rate of 38.12. Okay? So now we basically look at the rate card. You had a net 60 rate card. You took it from, and you're using 30-second, units and 10-second units. So technically what you did was take it from a net 60 to a net 30 or a net 10, and then you had to gross it up because your budget is gross. Okay? So now that we're dealing with the correct rates, now let's put this schedule together. So let me erase everything. So now we're putting the schedule together. Now you have calculated the gross budget allocation by day part and the correct gross rate. So now we can put this puzzle or this radio buy together. So there's 3 general steps here, okay? So number 1, you're going to take each budget allocation, and let's write it down again. Remember that in morning drive, let me use one... So let me write down the budget allocation by day part. And then you have the gross rate here. And let me just write the gross rate so I get this out of the way really quick. So the gross rate for morning drive is $127.94. This is for a 30-second gross. Here is 110.30. Here is 119.12. And here your 10-second gross rate in evening is 38.12. Okay, so now let's look at this scenario. So now what we're going to do is divide the gross budget allocation for each day part by the unit rate for each day part to calculate how many units you can place in each day part. So remember, you have the day part, you have the unit length, unit rate, and now we're going to calculate number of units. And then what we're going to do is remultiply the number of units times the rate in order to make sure that you have the correct budget allocation. Okay, so now that we have our budget by day part and we have the correct gross rate, remember we're dealing with a gross budget. Now what we're going to do here, in order to know how many times, how many units can we buy per day part, is a simple division. You take the budget divided by the unit rate, right? So you do that in every single day part. And for example, 1,500 divided by the correct 30-second gross rate in morning, which is $127.94. When you do that division, you can basically allocate 12 units here. You're going to do the same thing in midday, which is the budget, gross budget, was $1,250 divided by the correct gross rate, 30 seconds, which is $110.30. 1,250 divided by 110.30. And how many unit rates can you buy here? 11. In afternoon, repeat. The budget, correct budget, was $1,750. That was how much money you have in this to place commercials in this particular day part. Divided by the correct 30-second gross rate, remember we're dealing with gross budgets, is $119.12. So you can basically place 15 units here. And in evening, this is the day part where you have 10 seconds and you allocated a smaller percentage of the budget. So you had 10% to be exact. So here you have a total budget of $500. Your 10-second gross rate, 10-second gross rate is $38.12. So here you can place 12 units. So now we have the budget, we have the correct rate, the correct unit length, and how many, how many spots or commercials we can buy, per unit. So now, just remember that you may have to remultiply the resulting number of units times the unit rate to find out the total spent per day part. This step is done so you can adjust the number of units we can buy or place in each day part and place and spend as close to 100% if the budget, of the budget as possible. My rule of thumb is to spend all the money given by the client, unless dictated to save. Don't leave anything on the table, or as little as possible, without going over budget, which is always a major no-no. So you may have to tweak the schedule you may have to tweak the schedule if needed until you have spent the total budget without, again, going over budget, because going over budget within the allocated day part is okay. But you don't have to go over budget in the bottom line. Sometimes, and if this is the case, in this particular case, it was not necessarily to do the remultiplication to make sure that you're spending 500, 1750. Again, you can go over here, but you cannot go over in the bottom line. I hope that's clear. So let me go ahead and erase here really quick. So let's see what are our bottom line stats. Remember that you had, use the yellow, you had a budget of $5,000 gross. That was what you had to spend, and you were giving a rate card. So here, the total gross buy for this media schedule is, so you spend basically the total, this is what you were given, the total gross placement or budget is $4,992 with 82 cents. This is gross, which is as close as you can get to the $5,000 without going over budget. The agency commission, which means going from gross to net, in this case, is calculated, again, remember, 4,992 times 0.15, which is your 15% agency commission industry standard, equals $748.92. So now the net budget is calculated by subtracting the 15% agency commission from the 4,992, which gives you $4,243 with 90 cents. So now let's understand and report these results. Now, in this radio schedule, we're buying a combination of 30-second and 10-second units across various day parts. We worked out the schedule using a rate card that was provided by the station using 60-second net rates as base rates. And we had to convert each rate to a 30-second and 10-second gross rate using the parameters provided by the rate card. The radio schedule buy consisted of the following day parts. We bought 12 units in morning drive time and their 30 seconds at $127.94 gross each, and the total you spent in the day part was $1,535 with 28 cents. In midday, you bought 11 30-second units at $110.30 gross each, and you spent in the day part $1,213 with 30 cents. In afternoon drive, you bought 15 30-second units at $119.12 gross each, and you spent a total of $1,786 with 80 cents. In evening, you bought 13 10-second units at $38.12 gross each, and you spent a total of $457.44 in the day part. Your total gross radio investment was $4,992 with 82 cents. The 15% agency commission, whether the agency keeps it or not, we don't know, but the 15% agency commission is $748.92. And the total net radio investment was $4,243.90. The client approved $5,000 gross for this radio schedule. The advertising agency placed $4,992 with 82 cents gross. The radio station invoices the ad agency for the full amount with the 15% agency commission recognized. The ad agency pays the radio station $4,243.90 net, and the 15% amount of $748.92 is subject to the client agency compensation agreement if the agency gets to keep the full amount. In closing, and suffice to say that if the media rate card or avail shows that a rate is gross regardless of the client agency compensation, the rate has a 15% markup. The advertising agency can request net rates or the station can submit net rates, but as a rule of thumb, always clarify what you're working with to avoid misunderstandings. Another important consideration is that the media will always have to acknowledge that the advertising agency requesting the rates is a legitimate advertising agency to honor the 15% agency commission. When a new advertising agency approaches the media, whether it's a radio station, a TV station, outdoor company, etc., to request rates, before the media placement, they request what is called a credit application and proof that you're buying for other clients before this new agency is recognized as such. There are several ways that media works with payments for their airtime or ad space: extending credit to pay after the schedule airs, cash in advance if the client does not have proven credit history or if they have defaulted the media before, or in barter, where the advertising and media exchanges values, and the values can be, for example, let's say a concert promoter, the radio station logo, the presence and mentions at the concert event in exchange for airtime and concert tickets for on-air giveaways. All is designed to promote the event. This exchange can be a combination of cash and barter or exchange. It's all subject to negotiation, and it's a win-win for both parties. One last and important recommendation and advice is that when a client approves a budget, again, try to spend as close to 100% as possible. Find value-added opportunities. It's value-added or added value. But these are terms used for opportunities negotiated within the schedule that are bonus to incentivize the investment on behalf of the media to the, advertiser or agency. Become a skilled negotiator. The bottom line is the client approved the budget to be spent in order to achieve their business goals. Never, ever go over budget. Under promise and over deliver, always. Now continue practicing with the given radio schedule example and rate card example in the video lesson, and I'll see you in the next video lesson.